Hey everybody, it's Charlie Craven here at Charlie Slybox, and today we were talking about all the different materials to use for tails. And as we got into that, I've got my desk covered with all kinds of different materials to use for tails, and I probably don't have half of them. And I know that can get a little confusing, so we're going to try to shed some light on that today. And we're going to talk about dry fly and nymph tails. We're going to skip streamers for right now because there's so many different things you can use for the tail of the streamer, and sort of a different aspect and use for that kind of stuff. But I'm going to start off talking about nymphs. And yeah, we have guys ask all the time, I'm tying a rainbow warrior and I don't have any pheasant tail. Can I use hen hackle? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can. And very often, a lot of the soft materials that we'll talk about today, you can sort of substitute in and out pretty easily. Generally on a nymph tail, you're looking for something that is going to be soft, relatively durable. And maybe has a nice coloring, nice modeling, or appropriate coloring, which you maybe don't always have with something like a hen feather. You might need to go to a different fiber to match a lighter colored fly. So I'm going to talk first of all about hen feathers, and specifically just an India hen saddle feather. This is from a regular India hen saddle. These are pretty cheap. They've been around forever. They're a relatively, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small feather. And the only downside to that, they're beautifully modeled. They come dyed in a lot of different colors. We've got orange and olive and black and natural. The naturals typically are very nicely modeled like this. But the only downside to these in the grand scheme of things is these fibers get, particularly when you get down on a smaller feather on a smaller fly, the fibers are fairly short, so they can be a little hard to work with. And if I was going to tie a tail with a hen saddle feather, and I'm going to try to tie a tail with each of these materials just to show you the difference between what they end up looking like on the hook, because there's not going to be a huge variation to that. So many of these things will come out on the fly looking very close to the same, so you can substitute a lot of stuff. And I'll kind of tell you what the pluses or minuses are about each of them. So when I start with that hen feather, the first thing I'm going to do, and I just sort of did that off camera, is I'm going to just pinch that fluff off the bottom, so I've got just the nice, even, pretty fibers here. And what I want to do for a tail is I'm going to hold this feather by the opposite side that I'm going to pull from, and I want to pull a clump of fibers out. And my rule of thumb is I want that clump of fibers to be about as wide as the gap of the hook. But I'm going to pull those out at about a right angle to the stem, and it's not always exactly a right angle. Sometimes it may be a little down, maybe a little up. But what I want to do is try to get those tips evened up so that they're all square. Once I've got them there, I'm going to pinch those fibers and I'm going to pull the feather away. So now I didn't move this hand. I've got a much better chance of keeping that all nice and even. And I'll just sort of fold that clump up into a bunch, and I'll get my measurement, and then I'll tie that in at the bend for the tail. And that'll give me a nice little tail for a fly like a hare's ear, or, gosh, any variety of nymph, really. This is a cheap, easy-to-use material, comes in a lot of good colors, sort of the default tail for most nymphs. Like I say, as you get onto smaller or bigger flies, a bigger feather is easier to work with. And I have become, over the last couple years, since these came out, a big proponent of CDL hen saddles. These are essentially the same kind of thing. These are a genetic bird. This is a Coq de Leon hen, and this is the saddle from the bird. So you can see it's beautifully modeled, really nice modeling on it, but a much bigger feather. Let me pull another India hen feather, so you can kind of see the difference in size there. It's a much bigger feather, much longer fiber, which not only lends itself well if you ever wanted to wrap this as a soft tackle feather, but if you're tying where you've got to pull your fibers down to length, you've got a longer butt end to work with. It makes it much easier to kind of control the length of those fibers. All said and done, the tail really ends up looking very similar to what the India hen feather looks like. More color variations on the CDL hens, and I think much easier to work with. The other advantage is if you're going to tie a big soft tackled streamer or collar. I really like these for the legs on the 2-bit hooker because they're so long, they're very easy to work with, and I can get the butt ends trimmed out very easily. But if you're going to wrap a big collar, this makes a nice big collar. It's a big wide feather. Which brings us to the next one, which would be a CDL rooster soft tackle feather, and this is like the belly of the bird, and these are even bigger yet. You know, half again bigger than the CDL hen. So nice big soft feathers, treated the same way. The modeling is not quite so extreme on these. You can see between the hen and the rooster, the modeling is not quite the same. The hen has got a lot more speckling to it. The rooster has got a lot more of the dyed or natural color showing through. So while it's still got some variegation to it, it doesn't have quite the density of modeling. And I would treat this the same way. One thing I have noticed with these fibers is they tend to be just a little less webby than the hen. It's not that they're not still webby, they're just a little less webby. So if you've got a tail that you want to spread out, or you want to kind of spread out legs on a nymph, this is a good feather to use there. And you can see I'm just treating these the same way, you know, upon tying these in. You can see that's just slightly stiffer than either of the first two feathers. Probably lends itself a little bit better to a larger fly, but some nice fine variegation in there too without getting all dark or all light. So that's sort of what I would go, where I tend to gravitate for most nymph tails, is a hen body feather of some sort, hen saddle, hen body of some sort, whether it's CDL hen, a India hen, or I'm going to lump that CDL rooster soft tackle in with the hen feathers just because it's a large soft feather. Now, people ask all the time, what about partridge? And partridge is probably the prettiest and most variegated out of the bunch. These are just awesome feathers. They're beautiful. They're very short. They're not terribly durable, and they are very hard to work with because they're so small. The usable portion of that feather is about half of what we had on just the regular India hen feather. You can see the usable piece is much shorter, and honestly this is sort of a big partridge feather that I've got in my hand here, but I would treat it the same way, and I won't get as many tails out of this feather all said and done because there's just not as much of it, but I do get a really nice speckled mottled tail. My big knock on partridge, and I love this stuff, it's beautiful, it's just not terribly durable. You know, anytime I tie a fly with a partridge feather, Jujubatus originally had a partridge feather tail because they're so darn pretty, they just don't hold up very well. So you tie a bunch of flies and you end up with a bunch of them that don't have tails anymore. It's not to say not to use it, but just be aware of that. And you can see I used, you know, realistically I could probably get 3 tails out of this feather, where that India hen I could probably get 6 or 8 flies. That CDL hen feather I could probably get a dozen flies. CDL rooster feather I could probably also get a dozen flies. They're just going to be a little bit longer. So ease of use, the partridge is probably the hardest to use just because they're so short and fine. It is probably the prettiest out of the bunch, but probably the least durable as well. Which brings us to another material that's super commonly used on tails for nymphs, and that is pheasant tail. This is just regular ringneck pheasant tail. And since I've got this one, this is a secondary feather here that I'm holding up. This feather has got kind of these reddish rusty tips on one side and sort of gray drab fibers on the other. Anytime you get a feather like this, do not use this drab side for your tails. It doesn't marry together, or it does marry together. They kind of meld together, and they're very fine fibers. They won't make an individual fiber tail. You want to use the reddish tip side. And when you've got a brand new feather like this, what I like to do is kind of get down here at the bottom, get up to a reasonable length fiber, and I'll just strip all the fluff from there down off. So I can just work up from here. And I really treat all of these the same way. You know, this is a much bigger feather than what we just had with the hen feathers, but I'm still going to pull those fibers out at a right angle so that their tips become square, and then I'll peel them down off the feather and tie those in for my tail. Now, if you're tying a fly with a larger clump of fibers for the tail, pheasant tail is okay to use. I don't find pheasant tail to be terribly durable for most smaller flies. If you're just using 3 or 4 of them, a pheasant tail fly comes immediately to mind. I've tied 1 billion of those over my lifetime, and the tail is the first thing that comes off of those. They just are not, especially when you get down toward the very, very tip, they're going to be very fine. So it's not the most durable material in the world. If you're tying in a clump of them where you're tying in a big bunch, you can sort of afford to lose a few of them as you fish. It's a nice brown color. They come dyed in a lot of different colors. It's got a little bit of iridescence to it too, so there may be a little mystique in that as well. But pheasant tail does make a nice tail. Again, it's just whether you've got the durability of it or not. One thing all of the feathers so far have in common is they're all pretty soft fibers. I like those soft fibers. I think that they'll move around a little bit more in the water, give a little bit more flowing movement, as opposed to what has sort of become the tail of the year for the last few years, which would be a CDL rooster feather. Like so. And this is a light colored one. This is a variant. And this is what is typically used on perdigons and flies like that. And they kind of became popular. I imagine the first guy that tied those perdigons probably had some of this sitting around, and that's what he used on the tail. And the idea behind it is it's a very fine, very almost glass-like fiber. It's very fine. It's beautiful stuff. And this one is not terribly modeled, but they very often have really nice modeling to them as well. But I think what made this so popular is that because they're such a hard, shiny fiber, they're very durable, so they don't break off very easily. So it is a tougher tail, and I'd still treat this the same way, kind of get rid of the fluff on the bottom end. And what I would do on these fibers that don't have any web is I sort of stroke the fibers out so that they're perpendicular to the quill, like so. Get rid of some of this fluff here. And then I can take and line those fibers up and tie those in for my tail. And that's a fairly heavy clump. I've got a size 12 hook in the vise here. So fairly heavy clump. Typically on a purd, you'd have maybe half that amount of fibers, just a very very fine wispy tail, and maybe even a little on the long side. The idea of that is that tail is going to be very durable. Whether I buy into it helping the fly sink, there's a couple schools of thought on that. If you think of a fly that's weighted with a bead or with lead, if the fly is sinking perpendicularly, that is going to increase the surface area, and that stiffness is going to slow the fly down. If you tied that same fly on with a loop knot where it sunk head down, bead down, this tail's really not going to impact it much. The fly would sink straight down. That tail's not going to create surface area to slow it down. Just like for dry flies, surface area makes them float. On nymphs, surface area slows their sink rate, which is a great tool to use and know about if you're sort of paying attention to that. If you build a lot of surface area into a nymph and add a bunch of lead to it, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot. Skinny flies that have a lot of weight will sink faster than fat, bushy flies that have a lot of weight. So that's something to kind of keep in mind there. Typically on perdigons and things like that, either a very sparse CDL tail, or I use that CDL hin on a lot of mine just because I like the modeling on it a little bit better, and I think I get a little bit more movement. The softness of the hin, those fibers will sort of bend in the current, and even under the weight of the fly will kind of sweep up, where if the fly is drifting horizontally, that stiffer tail is going to not bend as much, not going to give as much. Sort of a couple different ways to think about that. And stiff tails on nymphs have never been a thing for me. That's come about in the last, I don't know, probably 10 years now. But I like a soft tail on most of my nymph patterns. But on a dry fly, I like stiff stuff. I think I've covered all my stuff on nymph tails. I will talk about biots, which are another very common nymph tail. And biots typically will be used on a stonefly style pattern. If you're tying a stonefly nymph, typically it will have a set of biot tails. Now that's not the only thing that you could use for the tails on a stonefly, but that's typically, if it's got a biot tail, it's probably meant to imitate a stonefly. Biot tails are tied in opposed on the hook, like you might for a prince nymph or a copper john, and you just oppose the curve of the two feathers, even them up, set them in, and end up with a nice little forked tail. Not so much something that you would use on a more nondescript pattern. Makes the pattern a little bit more specific. These are very durable. They're very hard feathers. They're a little tricky to tie in. I've got a couple different videos. I just showed you there how I do it. I think it's on the Prince Nymph and the Copper John. Both those videos that we've got out have got a little bit more in-depth on how to tie in a biot tail. But so a little trickier to tie in, but very specific use, and in the right place, they're the right tail for that kind of stuff. And of course, you can use marabou and fluff and all sorts of different synthetics, but that about covers my list of natural fibers for tail use. Now, some flies, a gold rib hare's-ear is a great example of a fly that uses a little tuft of fur for the tail. I don't typically do that. It's a very short fiber. It's harder to work with. I'll use hen feathers instead. Again, just ease of use and relatively cheap as it goes. You'll run out of hair off of the ear of your hare's mask long before you'll run out of fibers or feathers on your hen back. So that concludes our section on nymph tailing and brings us very seamlessly and smoothly into dry fly tailing, which can be equally as confusing, and where and when and how and why you would use different materials on any of those. Typically, what I like to use for dry fly tails are spade hackles. And this confuses everybody in the world about what a spade hackle is. There has been rumored that spade hackles have been bred out of modern dry fly necks, whiting capes, and I will tell you that they are not the same shape that they used to be. When I was a kid working with old Metz necks, the spade hackles were much wider and much more spade shaped. These days, these feathers are much narrower than they used to be. The length is still pretty good on them. This is just sort of a randomly selected one, but what we're looking for on a spade hackle is long, stiff fibers with no web. And you can see on this feather here down toward the base, there's a little web in there toward the center. You can even use those because that's the piece that's going to end up tied to the hook, so that's not going to impair any floatability or soak up any water because it's not going to be on the outside of the fly. Now, where these come from exactly, if I grab a cape, and this is a Hebert cape here that I've got, if I grab a Hebert cape and come out here along the outside edges, here along the widest part of the cape, that is a great example of a spade hackle. You have to think that these capes are the back of the rooster's neck. So this is actually the feathers that come around sort of on the inside of their chest. And a big, nice spade feather like that, where'd that one go? That was a really great example. We'll have, I don't know if this is the same one or not, but this will have very fine, very long, very stiff fibers that will make a perfect dry fly tail. And what I'll typically do to prep these, just to show you, I'll do this brown one, I think it's going to show up a little bit better. What I'll typically do here is I'll kind of come up out of the fluff on the bottom and out of the web, and then I hold the feather by its tip, and I'll stroke down against the grain. And you have to kind of do this gently so that you don't crease any of the fibers where you don't want them creased. Then I've got a little more fluff, a little shorter fibers here at the bottom. I'll strip those out. And I've got what I call a tailing blank. So I've got a dozen dry fly tails there, easy, probably 15 or 20 out of that one feather. This is also what you'd use for the tail on a bar emerger, same kind of thing, just a little clump of spade hackles. And again, I treat them the same way. I'll take a little clump, kind of pull them out at a right angle, pull them off the feather, and tie those in for my tail. And you can see I've got a nice bushy stiff tail. It's not going to give. It's going to create a fair amount of surface area there, and that's going to add some flotation to the back of our fly. On dry flies, there's a few different ways to tie in the tail. This is just a standard straight tail, and we'll do a few different videos on how to go about splitting tails and spreading tails out separately. But on a standard dry fly tail, that's just a clump of fibers like that tied in like so. If you were going to mix brown and grizzly, if I prep this grizzly feather, what I would typically do is I'd have tied that brown one in with one turn of thread and then taken my grizzly fibers and laid those up so that the tips were even and unwound that turn, then tied them both in at the same time so I get sort of a mixed little tail. You can see that makes that much easier to maneuver by just using the thread to hold it in the meantime. Fly like a parachute Adams or a regular Adams or any mixed hackle fiber tail, you can get a pretty dense, very stiff hackle fiber tail that's still fairly realistic. It's not going to be too bulky or too much volume to it. So that is a spade hackle tail. You can, of course, for dry flies, use that same CDL that we used just now for that nymph idea, and very much tied the same way. I like to spread these out a little bit more. but these are a little bit finer fiber, and you can spread them just with your thumbnail. You can use a figure eight, any variety of ways to make the tails out of that. One thing I find with CDL rooster fibers is they tend to be very fine. They are a little wispy, so if you make a very sparse tail, there's not going to be much to it. This particular saddle, this would be perfect for trico tails, just like 3 or 4 fibers for a trico tail kind of spread out wide. You know, on a bigger fly, I'd have to use a pretty big clump of this to make enough volume for a heavier dressed fly. Just different, it's the diameter of the fiber themselves versus a spade hackle. Spade hackle's got, relative to the hook size, a thicker diameter fiber. So it's going to be a little bit stiffer, and show up a little bit better, I guess is probably the best way to put that. So that's CDL rooster. Now there's, out there in the world, there's all kinds of stuff. This is a real, actual Spanish CDL, Coq de Leon feather from a rooster. And these feathers are not, they don't kill the bird to take these feathers. That's why they're more expensive. These feathers are plucked. And they tend to be very short, and they are very stiff and very nice. But they're very expensive. I don't know in the world that I would go to the trouble to tie with these. And I sell these, and of course you guys want to buy them. And so we, try to make you happy, and we sell them here. That's the last thing I'd use for a tail at $14 for a package of about 10 feathers. Man, I got a lot of dry fly capes laying around with spade hackles on them that make awfully nice tails. And I know, the Perdigon world wants to tell everybody that they've got to use stuff like that. If you've got some spade hackle, you can use that just as well. Or buy a whole whiting CDL rooster saddle for about $45, and you can tie 80 billion tails for the rest of your life until your grandkids die. And not run out then either. If you don't have a dry fly cape, if you're working with saddles, those little packages do seem to work out pretty well. Nature Spirit sells what they call dry fly tailing, which are just larger. These are from Chinese capes, but they're larger feathers. They're pretty fine fibered. They're along the lines of CDL, so they're not like a true spade hackle. They're a little finer fiber like a CDL feather. They are very long. They're a little wispy, so a little bit bigger clump in most cases, and they're fairly stiff. The advantage here is they're not terribly expensive. These would work perfectly for birds as well, so that's another easy way to do it. And of course, there's always, for dry fly tails, microfibrils or tailing fibers. These are synthetic, nylon synthetic fibers, like a paintbrush bristle. They're tapered on one end. They're very stiff. They're very durable. They come in a ton of colors, and they're fairly easy to work with once you get the hang of it. There's a few little tricks to it, and we'll make a video about how to play with these things as well. But that synthetic fiber, one of the things about this is it doesn't change its shape. If you take a fly and you fish with it and you stick it on your patch on your pack or your vest, the tail won't be bent out of shape like it often will with hackle fiber tails. So the synthetic fiber tails are much more durable. They are a little tricky to work with though, but that's a definite viable option for a lot of stuff. And then of course you get to hair. As you get up on a hair wing fly, a fly with a hair wing like say a royal wolf or a humpy, typically is going to have a hair tail. And what I like to use for that is moose hawk or moose body hair, which is going to be a much stiffer, coarser fiber. Not very often would I use deer or elk hair for a tail. The biggest reason there is when you tie this in. Let's just go ahead and do this just to show you. This is a clump of yearling elk that's just sitting here on my desk. So if I take this clump of hair and stack it up for my tail, and I've got 14-aught thread in my vise here, and I anchor it down, that tail is going to flare out a bit, which does create surface area, which on a big hair wing fly is not a terribly bad thing. That's sort of the whole idea of a hair wing fly with a big hackle collar, is that you've created some surface area. Flies like stimulators, a lot of adult stonefly patterns might have a elk hair tail, and the idea is that it'll spread out a bit. I do use deer hair on a few flies like that just because it'll spread and make a little more surface area at the bend of the hook, particularly for flies that I'm going to hang a dropper under so that tail doesn't get pulled down so easily, or the bend of the hook doesn't get pulled down so easily. So that's the difference there, is that flare is some liability. The other liability of using a hair tail is it does not compress on the hook as you go forward as much, so you're going to end up with a bit of bulk beyond what you would end up with a hackle fiber tail of any sort. So let's get rid of that, and I'll show you what the moose hair does in the same application. Again, just a small little clump. I'll stack that up in my stacker. And when I tie this moose hair in, let me get to a piece of thread that's not quite so beat up here. And I tie this moose hair in, and I can pull good and tight on it. Because it's a relatively solid hair, it doesn't really flare. So it's very durable, very hard. Still creates a good amount of surface area, but doesn't break off near as easily. This is what I'd use on a humpy or a royal wolf. Anything that I can get away with that darker colored tail. Truth be known, I use this on a lot of nymphs as well. A few strands of moose hair makes a really nice, very specific, anatomically correct tail, 2 or 3 fibers, and they're tough enough where they won't break off. They're thicker than microfibbets would be, so they'll show up better on little flies. Pretty useful material, and it's probably underused, honestly. Been around for a long time. Max, how long have moose been around? He doesn't know.
At least 3,000 years.
At least 3,000 years. So, yeah, I mean a while. I mean, at least as long as I've been tying. Moose have been around for a long time. You should use some of those. There's the gist of it being there's a ton of different materials that you can use to tie tails, and they've all got sort of advantages and disadvantages. And you know, I won't say there's only one way to do any of this. You have to sort of play with it. And like when I come up with a new fly, I might try 2 or 3 different materials for the tail. You know, kind of paired with the rest of the materials on the hook, and see which one sort of lends itself to that profile that I'm looking for. Lots of different ways to do it. They're all really tied in the same way and treated the same way. You know, measurement and things like that will vary, but the application is about the same. We'll show you a few different ways, like I say, how to split tails and spread them out to create different profiles as well in separate videos, so you can tune back in for that. But I don't think I've missed anything on my list. Surface area, durability, and colors. Softness and movement on the nymph stuff. That about wraps it up. If you guys have any questions, call Max directly on his cell phone late. He's up late at night, and he likes questions like that. Or come in the shop, and you can wait in line and ask me a question any old time you want. That's what I got for you today, you guys. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care.